And a special hello to the people of Southwood.
Hi guys, everyone, and welcome to the latest of our sort of stream chat things with Valleys Underground. We're really lucky today to be joined by some really awesome guests, and the topic for today is women's liberation in a socialist Welsh Republic. I'm really excited to just let you guys sort of chat about that. So first, I'm just going to run over some really quick housekeeping. So we are Valleys Underground. If you haven't heard of us before, which you probably have if you click on the link, to be honest, but we're a community action group. We just sort of do community action here in South Wales. We try and organise things in the communities. Obviously, with COVID, it's been a little bit difficult. So we're trying to sort of run across different things. And one of these streams are one of the latest ideas we've had, which is just getting people to talk about different ideas that face people in Wales. So I'm just going to run through quick introductions with everybody quickly before we get into it. So we are joined by Mabli Siriol. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hiya, I'm Mabli. I'm from Cardiff, and I'm currently chair of Cymdeithas, but been involved in a few other things. I never know how to introduce myself with stuff like this. It's just generic lefty, I guess.
Cool, thanks, Mabli. We are joined by Llinos.
Hiya. I'm an artist and a poet. I don't know, I write stuff. I try not to sound pretentious, but it's really hard when you call yourself a poet. Again, general lefty, doing bits with Indod. Just hanging out on Twitter, trying to not offend. Well, no, I do offend too much. There we go, yeah. That's me.
Cheers, Llinos. Hard on Twitter, not too sometimes. We're joined by Shash Appan.
Hi, I'm Shash. My pronouns are she, her. What I do, I guess, is I'm a local activist and primarily work on LGBT and trans rights and stuff to do with race and stuff. I'm one of the co-founders of Transaid Cymru, which is a mutual aid group for trans people in Wales. That's how I help a lot. And other than that, I'm disabled and stay at home, really, other than that.
Awesome, cheers, Shash. And we are joined by Charlotte Williams.
I am Charlotte. I live on the border in Welshpool. I'm a part-time media teacher, part-time no-budget filmmaker, and sort of a full-time Twitter nuisance, really. So I do a lot of sort of like films on history and stuff like that. And I sort of try and bring a little bit of my sort of personality as a trans person within the stuff that I make. But apart from that, yeah, it's just general lefty like everyone else.
Awesome, cheers, guys. So just really quickly before we go into the questions, if anybody wants to look at us further, you can find us at valleysunderground.com. You can find us on Twitter at valleysug with a capital UG. And we're on Facebook and Instagram and stuff as well under Valleys Underground for all of them. You'll probably find us if you just type in Valleys Underground. It's not like a common organisation name. The other thing we want to address is obviously this is a topic on women's liberation, and I am not a woman. One of the problems we had as a startup group in a year where we've been locked in our houses a lot is we haven't had a lot of new members, and we are still a predominantly male space. We want to address that before we get into it because we really want to make sure that we're addressing women's issues, and we would like to encourage women. You know, we are a safe space. If you want to join, if you want to get involved and help things throughout South Wales, not just the valleys, but that's where we're based at the moment. Please do just give us a check out, and if you feel like it, get involved. So we'll go straight into it, guys. Yeah. So the first question we've got, Phil, is political spaces often remain very patriarchal and dominated by men. That links into exclusionary attitudes directed at women and other underprivileged groups, such as the latest transphobia debacle in UK politics that's been going on for a while, have only exacerbated this problem. How do political parties and spaces exclude women, and how can we fix
this? So I think I guess I'll start some way. I think one of the issues is that the current electoral politics we have, it doesn't really address material concerns or things that women want and marginalized groups want, because it's very much catered to the people who are already very privileged, and so people, the rich, and they're essentially getting richer, and that's the end of it. And unless it affects things like, you know, the bottom line, they don't seem to care. It took us such a long time for um like um for like care to get, like, for women in general over history anyway, to get where it is. And we're also impacting learning that, like, how much women are relied as a backbone in this country during the pandemic, because during lockdown care workers are predominantly women, and they have been underpaid, exposed to the coronavirus, on the front lines, and it is frankly kind of not surprising that we weren't prepared for this, but also it's just how it is at the moment. Until we start valuing people for what they can bring to, like, not just about what they can bring to the table, but like valuing their existence as people, we're not going to get very far.
I don't know how to add to that. It's a really good question, answer to that. What I would add to that is like the need for non-male dominated spaces. So like, as for here now, talking. What I tend to feel in politics at the minute is, I don't know, it's a bit threatening, especially just getting started in politics, or especially in lefty groups. Say if you've not read much theory or any theory, and you're being bombarded by, I don't know, arguments about this some white guy who's died about 50 years ago. You have no idea who he even is, and you I don't know. I feel like it's not accessible. A lot of politics is right now, personally, anyway.
Yeah, I see. Like, I think, like, one of the, the Socialist Workers' Party, for example, specifically, not the Socialist Party, the Socialist Workers' Party, they've multiple times sheltered rape accusations and rape apologists, and it's happened twice now that I know of. And two separate incidents is what I'm talking about. Like, and it's very showing that, like, big, like, even within the left political sphere, it's very hard for women and marginalized people to get in, because there's most of the communist parties in Britain are very much like transphobic, and a lot of them do not there's a lot of class reductionism, which is a massive issue. Like, you can't, unless, and there's this idea of that, like, identity politics is unnecessary and overused, but like, identity politics isn't necessarily a liberal thing. It is very much something like intersectionality is something that you need to use as a tool when analyzing, because class is not complete. Like, and that's the thing with theory and stuff. It's great if you can recite it, I guess, but like, unless you understand and apply it to society, like the one we live in right now, because those scholars wrote about their material needs and concerns when they existed. So we've got to evolve that literature, and it's so important to listen to marginalized writers and theorists, and not just in the form of theory, but the arts as well, because there's some things like class struggle and people who aren't necessarily academically educated. It's one of the ways that we can get to express ourselves in a format that'll reach many more people than having to, like, like, someone's song about like their struggles as a person of color or a woman or whatever is gonna reach out more than you reciting theory
Oh my
in
God,
front of like Yanya and
exactly.
Bevan's statue. Yeah, you know, like it's not gonna work, is it?
Yeah, it's so much like big dick energy and people just trying to out quote each other, like who can remember the longest Lenin quote? And do you know what I mean? Like, it really frustrates me because it's not accessible and it's quite off-putting. Because I remember me starting off being like, oh, what is socialism? And then you do like, you know, you go to a meeting and then you just get bombarded by this terminology, and I don't know, it's quite scary, I feel, as well, especially if it's because as a young woman in a foreign, I don't know, in like this new place that's quite male dominated, and it's not friendly, I guess. And at the end of the day, socialism should be about wanting to build a community and wanting to get along with people and not scaring people away and trying to, I don't know. I don't know what my point is, but it's basically it should be way more accessible and not about
You
big
see it a lot,
scary
don't you?
theory books.
You see that quite a lot. Sort of if you look at sort of the differences between like leftist politics and a lot of maybe people on the right, our solutions and our discussion is usually way more nuanced and sometimes a lot more complicated than the ability just to point at someone and say, well, they're to blame or they're to blame. Like you see it now with certain groups who are blaming trans people for everything under the sun for just simply existing. To them, it's an easy sort of thing to go, that's the group we're going to pick on today. And it's far harder to say, well, actually, no, the reasons why people are poor, or there's reasons why, you know, that you get the different levels of like, social mobility and stuff like that is not just because someone over there is taking something away from you. It's this whole complicated system. And I think that's the struggle I get. Yeah, it's something like I have sometimes of being able to get involved in that space when, yes, quite difficult, as you said, like to try and sometimes get in, to get behind that sort of theory or get behind those ideas and stuff like that and be able to express them in a way that not just sort of works for the people who are in those leftist circles maybe, but to get those people who are maybe more floating voters, people like, you know, my parents who are, you know, they are Labour voters, leftist people, but they don't understand 99% of what I'm saying, you know, so, but it's far easier for someone, you know, like a Farage to wander down to Merthyr or Rumney and just pick on other people and say, well, they're to blame. And it's far harder for us, as you said, in that instance, to maybe talk about those subtle issues and the sort of subtle reasons why things are the way they are.
I think, I think it's also a case though of seeing, I think like Shash said, like seeing theory as a tool that you can use to better understand the world around you, and that actually, you know, it can be an incredibly like powerful experience when you come across sort of you know, emancipatory sort of theories that sort of suddenly like help you to understand the world and how it is and certain experiences you've had, and you know, that can be really life-changing for people. And I think the way that we do that is not to throw theory out of these movements, but to sort of to make it more accessible in terms of, you know, political education projects like Valleys Underground are doing, I suppose, with you know, I know like a lot of these kind of conversations and reading groups. There's sort of a lot of one thing I think has been positive like over recent years is a bit more of a focus on the need for political education. But I suppose the other thing to add to that then is just making sure that that is done in a way that doesn't centre certain narratives to the exclusion of others. And I think some of the things like people have said about you know, the perception or the experience of what left-wing groups can often feel like for people coming into them as a woman or as a marginalised person. I think, you know, what's at the heart of that is that the left still hasn't quite, despite decades of arguing about this stuff, still hasn't really grasped that, you know, the concerns of women, the concerns of people of colour, of LGBT people, that those things are central. They're not a distraction. They're not an optional add-on that you cannot have you're not going to have liberation for anyone, whether that's the working class or anyone else, without having liberation for everyone, and that you need to that rather than treating these things as something apart that we will address at some point, that they should be there central to your whole conversation. I think like Shash's example of the analysis of like care and how central that is to the economy and society today, that's not a women's issue. That should be like a left-wing issue at the heart of everything we do.
Joe posted a question in the chat, and it is: due to the less important place on theory, do you see anarchist movements as more inclusive towards LGBTQ community than classical statist communism / socialism? I've got I think personally, I don't know, but like I do see it as more inclusive, not because maybe the reasons of partially because of the mention of class reductionism and the idea that in a lot of classical statist communist and socialist groups as well, there's a very emphasis on the word working in the working class, and what is always largely left out of the group, and like people like me who are able to work a full-time job because of a disability, and our labor is not the most important thing to give to society, if that makes sense. And it shouldn't be the quantity of labor that should be the issue. It should and thinking of labor in the sense of like what we traditionally think is one of the detriments to that kind of classical statist communist socialism, especially the groups that recruit on that basis, because what you see in grassroots anarchist movements is the idea of people coalescing around the fact that like there is especially now the divide between the have and have-nots, is so much bigger. Class mobility, social mobility in the UK is worse than America. Like this isn't we are in an and there is a reason why people are speaking up and rebelling and talking. It's things like when especially more marginalized communities have felt the brunt of this austerity that we've been feeling. It's the reason that, and the more marginalized people happen to be the LGBTQ community, the women, people of color, the disabled. And that's why they tend to move towards more anarchist kind of leanings. And that's not necessarily to say that classical statist communism and socialism wouldn't be possible or isn't something to look forward to, but at the moment it does seem to be more successful in moving towards, because there is the idea of disenfranchisement within electoral politics, which is like Corbyn was very popular, very liked by a lot of the marginalized community, and for his own party to essentially cut his chances, it shows that there is no voice for the people who kind of rallied behind some of the ideals, and since there is no like political parties we have right now, the major ones, there is no candidate that we can reliably vote for that will take our needs into consideration as marginalized people. Because if you're white and you're working class, you'll probably be vote Labour and they'll probably be fine and they'll do everything for you. But if you're trans or a woman or something, or a person of color, you've got like mountains of fucking racism to deal with and sexism within the party, and it all trickling down. That's the only trickle down we get. It's not trickle down economics, it's trickle down bigotry at the end of the day, isn't it? But yeah, I don't know how do you guys feel about that kind of thing, I guess.
I think it's always important when talking about whichever political movement, that you don't, like, it doesn't have to be a choice between either or, does it? Like, we don't have to choose between class struggle and the needs of women, marginalized people. We don't you can't have a focus just on purely economic policies without considering how they interact with people's actual everyday lived experiences, and the sort of the intersections of gender and race, and so on. So I think it's kind of, while there have been failings obviously with a lot of leftist movements in the past where they've been like quite reductionist, and sort of labourist. I think there have, of course, been failures in other movements which have sort of focused very much on a sort of politics of representation, to the exclusion of needing to focus on like people's material needs and the redistribution of wealth. So I think it's not either or. You need both.
Yeah, I agree with that totally. I think what sort of joins the isms together, was it, I don't know, communism, or was it like party or state, whatever. What men tend to do, like you said, Shash, earlier about like identity politics and the idea that they can turn identity politics and then say, oh, that's such a liberal thing. It's like this liberal cooptation of that. It's not a home in leftist politics. And I think, well, that whole idea of that, it distracts from main issues. I don't know what main issues implies that everything else is a niche issue, which I don't want to quote anyone on that, but niche issue is a famous one. But in itself makes men more sexist, in my opinion. The idea that you tell other people that your being is distracting from. Oh, anyway, I'm getting angry now. But but yeah, it's that idea of like this, the what do you call it? Soft boy. That's the thing, isn't it? Like this whole thing about. Sorry, I'm bringing internet culture.
Soy boys,
now,
yeah.
Soy boys. That's the one. It was close. Yeah, but it's that idea of like trying to out woke each other, but in the end, you're just coming off as an actual bigot. But anyway, that's my piece.
Yeah, I think you're saying there about people saying that focusing on the needs of yourself and stuff like that, like, is a distraction from things and stuff like that. We've seen that a lot of doing a lot of stuff for the independence movement and stuff like that. I think anytime a group brings up, well, we would support independence, but this kind of stuff is kind of barriers for entry. So it's like, oh, well, just get behind it and we'll sort it out later on. But the problem there is that you can't trust people to sort things out later on. We've got to be able to sort these issues now, or at least have discussions on some of these problems or these issues that face all of us, or as individual groups and stuff like that, and be able to work together now, rather than hoping, we'll just get people on board and then we'll kind of see what we can do afterwards. I don't think anyone is ever saying, especially sort of us on that more this side of like the independence movement, that we need to have all those structures in place now. We need to get everything sorted and then declare independence. But I think we should need to have that conversation at least, and be able to have those discussions and have those disagreements as well from some areas, and do them now rather than later, because there'd be nothing worse than us going into a potential independent situation which may not even happen by our choice, considering the way the United Kingdom has decided to completely fall apart in the past couple of years. But at least having those conversations in the first place, and making sure that everyone, or at least as many people's voices, are brought in as we can.
Yeah. I think moving on, like with the aspect of independence, there's quite a few questions on the similar line. What does a feminist social independent Wales look like, and how do you make like a feminist case of independence from the UK? Does anyone want to start? Because I feel like I started on the last few too.
Well, I think I think you have to make that case, don't you? I think sort of following on from what Charlotte was saying, really, I think any independence movement is completely kidding itself if it thinks that you will get independence if you don't first persuade people that it will make their lives materially better. You people aren't inspired, and most people aren't inspired by a very sort of empty constitutional politics that doesn't really address like the reasons why people would want to leave the UK. And there's plenty of reasons why you would want to, like I probably don't really need to make the case here, but it's quite clear that there is no progressive future in UK politics in the makeup of the British state. So I think, following on from that, you then make the case of like independence is a vehicle towards something better, that you can build an alternative, that Wales can be a different kind of country. But it's not an end in itself. So why are people going to get inspired and want to get involved unless they can see that it is leading to something better?
Yeah, I think because like it's no point having a platform if there's like, it's great and all that we're independent, but what does independence actually bring us, allow us to do essentially? What do we actually gain from it? And one of the things that I like always kind of like try to talk about when I try and get people to understand like things like everyone should have a home kind of thing. No one should be homeless, like right now, for example, or like sex work is work and we should decriminalize it. Things like that. The ways I get like for the homeless ones, like we have at the moment more empty homes than homeless people, which doesn't make sense, does it? It's like just thinking about that, it shouldn't exist in a society that we claim to be tolerant, accepting, etc. And there's always it's like, well, and the obvious thing is to just give them the homes, and it's like, and there's always two things as well. Other people own those homes, and it's like, well, if they're already living in a home, do they need the second home? Not necessarily. It's not needed. Why do those? It's just sitting there empty. It can be used. The other thing is, well, they didn't earn it, and it's like, are you really going to let your ego get involved in something where it's a fundamental thing, like hierarchy of needs? You need a home. People need a home, and are you really gonna get annoyed that this person who has literally nothing, they don't even have a home, that because they didn't earn it, you're gonna get annoyed at that? Like, Jesus Christ, grow up to be the better person. You already have a home and successful, or have a second home or whatever. You don't need it, because, and that's the thing. It's about understanding that, like, if we move for an independent Wales, we can devolve things like housing and actually push for that kind of affordable housing and stuff like that. And things like sex work, we can push to decriminalize sex work and provide protections for sex workers, and really like take a stand in things where Westminster has control right now. For example, like we can put, like, because our funding block is, for example, controlled, especially things like the NHS. Healthcare is such an important thing that we like STD clinics and stuff like that, or we could have more of them. Wouldn't it be nice, like, if we had a funded NHS, which can be possible? We have the money, there isn't like a money magic tree. It's easy. We just get rid of billionaires and tax the rich. It's not that hard, and we have that funding, so like we can have a fully funded. We could have you could call your GP on the phone and have an appointment within the week instead of having to wait a month. Like that we can have these things that can help us materially, and like things like easily accessible birth control, understanding and teaching things about, like, in education, like that, understanding that sex work is work, and that understanding of changing the education system to decolonize make it less like, especially history, for example. We trying to center the white cis male history of the world, and there's so much about for Wales that, like, because like I'm Indian, I have like Indian heritage upbringing, and a lot of things and concepts of like spirituality and stuff existed also in Wales, and similar concepts of like genderless beings and the ideas of the spirits. There is a lot of history that has been ruined by cis white male historians because they got a bit annoyed and a bit snowflakey about not being the center of attention, you know? Uh, yeah, yeah, any other questions, I guess? What was the next question?
If you
Or if
guys want,
anyone else wants to talk.
I can read out the next panel question if you guys want. So the next one we've got from the group is kind of links in with what Shash was saying earlier about the failure to deal with sexual assault cases by the Socialist Worker Party and other groups. And obviously in the news recently, it came about from an old report that 99% of reported rape cases in England and Wales result in no charges, which is kind of really distressing, but also not overly surprising, which is sad. How do we fix the handling of like sexual assault, rape, those sort of crimes to make spaces safer for women, make people feel like they can report them rather than just resulting in nothing?
I think well, I think we can have a little show of hands of how many of us have either experienced sexual assault or sexual harassment, or know someone close who has experienced sexual assault or harassment. And I think pretty much every one of us, and if that doesn't say anything, I think that's like, it's shit. It's England and Wales. It's shit. With 99%, it's just fucking horrendous. It's one of my cases with that 99%. I'm pretty sure a few of my friends I know that nothing. People don't report because they know it's not going to happen half the time, and yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's depressingly, I think the question about how you improve those stats, I think the answer is quite difficult, because I think, you know, the reality is, in the UK, like, I mean, rape is effectively decriminalised because there are no consequences through the legal system for the vast majority of victims, like, as that stat shows. And our legal system is just not built to be able to deal with these issues. It's not built to be able to take them seriously. And I think, you know, that's been shown like decades, you know, all the time. You know, people are constantly failed by this system. And I think rather than focusing on what you can do within that, you know, it's not about awareness training for police officers. It's not about changing like the internal processes of the Crown Prosecution Service, because we've tried those things and they are tinkering at the edges. I think, you know, that sort of relying on the criminal justice system and having moves towards like very much focusing on that more and trying to criminalize more activity, trying to use those channels, it fails us. And I think unless we can have a bigger conversation and a bigger reckoning with the actual structural injustices behind those things and the imbalances of power, and, you know, an entire culture that normalizes sexual assault and abuse of power, then I think that we're not going to get there. And unfortunately, you know, that means it is really hard work, but the things that we've been trying so far aren't working.
No, yeah, I totally agree with Mabli there. Like, you can't fix the legal system because it's not built for us. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not built to empower us. It's not built to empower anyone. It's more to keep us, I don't know, but it's just like, the thing is with rape, if you have been raped, right, or what are you meant to do in that situation? Really, are they expecting you to go to the police station or call them? Because at that minute, at that time, you are the most vulnerable that someone can possibly be, and the support that's there, it's not enough, and basically it's not there. And yeah, it's a really hard subject to talk about as well. But or I don't know, just thinking about like past experiences. How are you going to be like? I don't know. I was like 17, and you've been raped. How are you meant to go to a police officer and explain what stealthing is to like a middle-aged man and be like, do you know what I mean? And try to explain that is rape. That in itself is not usually, it's not your responsibility, and it's so frustrating because they don't want to listen to you really at the end of the day. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. That's my
Yeah.
piece.
No, it's important. Like that's the thing. A lot of it is like it doesn't feel right that like in some ways like the onus on how little like advocacy we get in that kind of scenario once with the system, because it's systemic in the sense, like, for example, I don't know like if you guys know, but like when I got to like SARC, which is the Sexual Assault Referral Center, and I said I wanted counseling, they said essentially like, okay, you can have counseling and therapy, but you can't report, because if you report, the police can look through your counseling and therapy records, and like that's not for to be aired in court as the defense of your rapist, you know? Like that's not like this is half the reason most of these cases don't actually go through, is because the system is stacked against you. People won't take these cases. They, for example, you know, like the defense is allowed to look through your phone and stuff, you know, like, and then this is the thing, and these like these officers and the ghouls, they will look through and say, essentially, before it even gets to the defense, by the way, they'll be like, oh, it seems like you're kinky according to your internet history, so that'll be used against you, so we can't take this to your court. Or if you were taking part in sex work, or if you were like, I don't know, trans or a person of color or not conventionally beautiful or whatever that is. And it's just any one of those things can be given as a reason of why they'd be like, we don't think you'll be a sympathetic enough victim, so we're not going to take this. Like it's that kind of the more ready to deny us justice than actually take a case forward or actually do their job. You know, that they find it easier and easier for them to do, like, basically just rather than fight for our justice. Then that's the issue, really, isn't it? It becomes a point of like the system that currently exists, especially if you want to I don't even like, there's always talks in America of like doing civil suits, but like civil suits is so difficult, you know, like just thinking, like, even in people always say like, oh, you can sue them or something, but like I don't know how to hire an attorney for that. I don't want to have to deal with that. Like, why is it I am trying to recover from a sexual assault? I do not have time, you know? I got my brain to untangle at this point.
I know it's so much emotional labor as well that goes into
Yeah.
dealing with it, and you're like your network of friends that you have to depend on because there's nothing else there.
Yeah. And all of that could be used against you if it's seen as like anyway, like makes you more promiscuous or more, I don't know, susceptible to sexual assault, because that's what they do. And it's just like the fact that that's an like applicable defense is just disgusting. And that's the thing, is that like until we kind of understand that like what happened isn't the victim's fault, until there's a clear understanding that people will believe that. I don't feel like the system believes that right now. That I don't think they believe victims, no matter like how much they say they have moved forward. Because if they would have moved forward, as like Mabli said, like we wouldn't have, like, if the system 99% is just egregious.
Yeah, and it's like it's horrendous that anyone should ever be made to choose between pursuing a case and receiving support. And and I think like all the examples you've given, they're all examples of how those wider cultural systemic issues, they like our legal system is shaped by all of that. It's built by that. It wasn't built to secure justice for women or marginalized people. It was mainly built to persecute marginalized people. And I think, when you look as well at like what is it that a victim needs? It's not being re-traumatized by a legal process that's going to put them on trial and force them to perform the role of the perfect victim. What most people need is they need healing and they need support. And all our rape crisis support services have been cut to the bone, to the point where people wait months and years to have any sort of mental health support. It's atrocious, and I think the focus again should be on how austerity has removed the very small social safety net that we had, and how when people are in like real crises that they end up with a horrible choice, like you outlined earlier, Shash.
Mhm. It's horrible. And talking about rape crisis centers, one of the things for trans people like me and Charlotte, we there's a worry that will be turned away, like there's some reason that some reason trans women are seen like as a threat by a small, very vocal minority who are getting a lot of traction within our political systems, like Helen Mary Jones. Like, I can't vote in good conscience Plaid, for example, when I know someone who literally in that party is in a position that hates my existence. Like, they don't want that person does not want my being and Charlotte and other trans people we know in the independence of Wales they envision, like that's the kind of thing. And it's just when you're already like how for people to say like things where we're like, for example, trans women are one of the most um they're, they're one of the biggest groups that are targeted by sexual assault. Like, the rate is ridiculous, and that there's a lot of factors for that. However, the fact that like there's a worry that we'll be turned away when we're at our lowest is horrible, because of something that, like, my transness doesn't make me a predator. Like, that's not, it doesn't make anyone like that. uh i I didn't choose to be trans. I don't think anyone chooses to be cis or trans, like it's something that you just are. And for it to be villainized, that we want to like attack someone like that, and it's just ridiculous to ostracize a group who are vulnerable like us because of this vague belief that like men will pretend to be trans women to access these spaces, when, like, you know what they could just do? Like, they could just do that because it's illegal anyway, so there's no issue for, like, this is like, if men are gonna like be predators and sexually assault people, they're not going to pretend to be a trans woman to do that and get away with it. They know what they're doing is a crime, like, I don't think they're considering like they can use the excuse of, oh, I was a trans woman. That doesn't make the crime of sexual assault go away. And it's horrible to be villainized for something like that happens to your community a lot, and it's genuinely distressing. And it's not, and it's frustrating in the sense of like, we're always used as a scapegoat in that scenario, and it's horrible. But yeah, uh and I, like, a little tangent here, I guess. I was talking to a friend who, they help run one of these crisis centers in Scotland, and she told me, it's like, well, most studies actually show having like single sex only spaces is more detrimental to people's care, because one of the things we don't actually have, surprisingly, is you know, if you're sexually assaulted and as a man, you don't have a place to go, really, a crisis center or domestic abuse. And one of the things that's shown is like having, because that's the thing, when you go to these centers, they essentially assess you before you go in. You know that these people have dealt with people who have suffered, and they know who's coming in and saying like, you know, they're struggling. And studies have shown like villainizing like one whole in that care, in that rehabilitation, in the excluding a sex can paint that entire sex and make recovery harder for the victim, essentially, and give what's the word, I can't remember, like residual trauma around like vast swaths of people, essentially, depending, like, so it's very important. It's a tricky thing of like, because how funding is dictated right now, because if you want to apply for funding at Red Cross, you have to apply as either like for a specific community, and that's the women's community, or BAME, or LGBTQ. You can't be BAME and LGBTQ. You can't be BAME and women, or like that. It has to be one specific funding block. And it's that kind of thing where it makes it very hard to actually take care of people. So one of the things is like non-binary people, for example, you know, uh, they're also part of the trans community, but they may not feel comfortable in a women's shelter at the end of the day, because, you know, they're not a woman. That's just simply it. And it's it sucks. The system sucks. There is no like, if you're a victim of sexual assault, the UK has basically told you get fucked, and that's it. Yeah.
Cool. Are you guys happy to move on to the next question, or does anyone want to add anything? Cool. So the next question ties in again with something that's been mentioned previously. So it's about Wales's national identity. So it is often sort of built upon this like really patriarchal reading of Welsh history and Welsh identity that's written by and for cis white men. So when people think of Wales, they think of the rugby, they think of the miners, they think of all these typical things, despite the fact that Wales' history sort of includes many different people who are all brilliant, of every marginalised community, people of colour, women, LGBTQ plus people, and they're often sidelined in favour of this like hyper-masculine male reading of Wales' history and national identity. So I want to sort of ask you guys how this reinforces the existing forms of patriarchy and sexism in Welsh society and Welsh culture, and how we sort of overcome these like hyper-masculine stereotypes for a more diverse and a more accurate depiction of Wales' national identity.
And one of the things that when I first started getting involved more in sort of Welsh politics and stuff in general, and sort of supporting the independence movement, I always felt it was quite hard being a trans person whose entire like understanding of what a trans person was came from sort of the United States or other countries. You know what I mean? It was always sort of our sort of group or our friends were always quite far away and stuff like that. And I always felt like, well, if I am in the independence movement, I have to just be a Welsh person rather than a Welsh trans person. And it's taken me quite a while to sort of find out with it, sort of get that within me, that sort of understand identity, that I can be a Welsh trans person, and there are lots of other trans people in Wales, and we don't have to always look to the United States for our friends and stuff like that, because we are here, and quite a lot of people within Wales, trans people, do have quite strong Welsh identities. They feel quite strongly Welsh, and a lot of people in the end, there's quite a decent number of trans people within the indie movement. They're not sort of as vocal as some other people now. They would like to stay sort of on the side, which is sometimes for the best on the internet. But yeah, there was that struggle for me early on of being able to take those, I guess, what I felt was like two separate identities, as like a Welsh person and then a trans person, and put them together in a way of like, well, how does this one inform this identity, and how does this identity sort of inform that one, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think one of the things that it's the thing is like the idea of being Welsh has been weirdly, especially with people like Adam Price's comments on saying Wales is the last colony, that kind of thing. It really rubs like marginalized groups the wrong way. Like me, like you can't. Wales isn't like a colony. They actively participated in colonialism. Like there is, you can't call it the last colony when we literally have occupied territories abroad, like as the UK. Like there is no. It's very disingenuous, and it's just it alienates people rather than brings people. And that's the thing. Like it's a dumb mistake. Like you do not need to say that. Like that's the thing. Like there is no reason to defend it either. Like there is more about there's more to what being Welsh than how we were like how being fucked over by the English, you know? That's what I mean. Like there is we are we've got rich culture and food and like and there's been and one of the big things of like the Welsh language provision and the Welsh medium and stuff. Like I can't speak Welsh, but I know as a person who is bilingual that like to keep a language alive like that, it preserves culture too. It does, and it's it's great to see, and it's got to be understanding that like you don't need to be white to be Welsh, you know? Like there's no such because being Welsh isn't a race, it's not an ethnicity. It's understanding that Wales is your home. That's it, really, isn't it? It's about understanding that like this is where your roots are, like you've put your roots down if you are moved here. Like no matter how shallow, how deep those are, no matter how far back it goes, as long as you are you you love Wales in some way, you know. To me, that's Welsh enough. You know? Like I'm originally like I mostly grew up in Birmingham, but once I was homeless and I moved to Cardiff, and Cardiff took me in, and then Wales became my home. My fiance is Welsh, and with people I know who live here now. Like it's that like people who want Welsh independence and that kind of pushing for that kind of typical nationalism of like being proud to be Welsh. It needs to be the understanding that being Welsh is so multifaceted for some people that it's not all about beer, rugby, and cold, wet weather. You know. um. So like
Yeah, and I
yeah.
think, it is a really interesting question because I think it's such a strong tendency in Wales, in Welsh politics and culture, and the sort of stories we tell ourselves, and it's just so deeply alienating to so many people, and it's this sort of idea of Welshness that's been built on very like specific male experience and a sort of like valorizing of like certain types of work or certain types of cultural tropes, and but it to most people it very much leaves them cold. I mean, it definitely leaves me cold, and it says a lot about what we value as a culture. But I do think it's also sometimes been used to very successfully in Wales, like pit a lot of different groups against each other. So we've often had this kind of pitting of the Welsh language against saying that the Welsh language is somehow like exclusionary, inherently exclusionary, and sort of ignoring sort of the different traditions and the diversity that exists within those communities too. But I do think to me, I think, like, to be optimistic, I think, like, recent years, things do seem to have got better in terms of, like, the voices that are contributing in sort of Welsh politics and, like, cultural creation. And, like, you know, you three on the panel today, who I know have been involved in, like, different projects which have, like, really moved the conversation on. I think what I do find a little bit disheartening sometimes, though, is that I do see a lot of especially young people, young marginalised people, raising concerns about, you know, behaviour or conduct from, like, political leaders or political movements. And I see you know, something that can be very hard for people to do, and they really only get crumbs in return, rather than a genuine effort to build in, you know, a movement that is, like, actually inclusive, that is actually representative of the real diverse range of people's experiences.
Yeah. I again, like, just looking, like, what is Welshness in, like, Welsh history, and you think about, especially in the indie movement, you've got everyone with big hard-ons for, I don't know, Owen Glyndŵr, and do you know what I mean? Like, there is a time and a place for him, but I feel like most of the time he's, yeah, again, this is me just getting really frustrated about, like, the whole Mab Darogan thing. Like, this idea there's this one guy who's going to save Wales. I mean, like, come on, we need, like, a community of people that want the best for everyone. Do you know what? We're not waiting for one. Anyway, that's my little rant. But I got, when I was, like, researching for this, I was looking about how Wales was trying to nation build in the last century, or not last century, in the late 19th century. And it was really interesting how the Welsh intellectuals were trying to, like, make women clever. This was really interesting because we're like, yeah, we're going to make women allowed to go to university. So, like, in Aberystwyth, women were allowed and study Welsh history and Welsh literature. And I felt like the reason why it was because they pass on the knowledge to their children and be good wives and mothers. But the really funny thing was that, like, 10 years later down the line, they were like, fuck, these women are actually quite interested in this, and I'm quite, you know, they might be better than us about this academic stuff. And then they were like, the Welsh, it's really interesting. I'd anyone looking at Welsh history and, well, nation building should definitely look at 1910s Welsh internationalist theory, because it's insane, and it's quite dangerous, actually, because I think right there shows what, if Wales becomes independent and it's not inclusive and it's not intersectional, it's going to be like that. It's going to be independence and some niche issues that we will address at some point. When that day comes, I don't know, and if it will come. But I think yeah, Welshness should be inclusive. I don't know why that's even a question. And it's quite sad because when I don't know, when we're looking about Welsh history in schools, I think that's a big debate that's going on right now, and the discourse on Twitter. So, like, it's not just about including Welsh history; it's about what kind of history. Because we don't want to. Again, that's off-putting. If you're just going to go on about Glyndŵr for, like, 7 lessons a year, you're going to put people off because it's not engaging. It's not telling you about Welshness. Because Glyndŵr does not care about plebs like us. Do you know what I mean? Like, he would not care about us women sitting about talking about niche issues. He'd be going off on a horse somewhere. But do you know what I mean? Yes. Sorry, that was my little thing. But yeah.
Yeah, I think on the mention there of, like, the topic of sort of Welsh history in schools and stuff like that, we're doing a lot of, you know, the past, like, I think it's been 3 years I started making the film I'm making. Can't remember, it's been quite a while. And I've had to, like, I think it takes a while because I have to, like, sort of constantly reevaluate, yeah, that sort of what it is trying to say. What am I trying to say with that film? And then you take that forward into like discussions on like Welsh history and stuff like that. Like in the past sort of few years since the wall, the Covent Garden wall in Llanrwsted was knocked down, there's been a lot of it has been taught in schools in quite a lot of different places. But it's always that, again, like what is actually taught, what's discussed, and what you can learn from that. It's all well and good. I think quite early on, quite naively, I could have easily framed it as some sort of like, oh, these people over there have come and they've drowned this poor Welsh village and stuff. But you see that actually when you look at it a little bit further, you scratch that surface, you look at things like, well, this is a failure of society. It's essentially capitalism taking something, it's extracting from somewhere. I don't think Bessie Braddock sat there and thought, oh, I can't wait to get one over on the Welsh by drowning a village. It's all purely things like economy. They only did that. They did that because it was the most amount of water they could extract for the cheapest amount of money. I'm going to do a bit of a plug. The first episode of the thing that I'm releasing in a few weeks, whenever I can finish it off. If we look at some of the places that were under consideration, so the valley, the Delanog Valley, in just up the road from here in Maldwyn and stuff like that. Those places were under consideration, and it was only finances and just, well, we get more from there for less. So it's all these things like, if you're teaching history, especially to like Welsh history, it's that thing of what you want to actually teach and how you frame that conversation and what you want people to get out of it. Do you want people just to know the dates of when Glyndŵr went and had a battle over here or something like that, or do you actually really want to have a discussion on, what Capel Celyn means to a modern society, and what lessons can you learn from there other than just, sort of, well, we'll get one back on the English. We've got to have those more mature conversations and say, well, this was a failure of democracy, a failure of a society, rather than just simply they didn't like some people in Meirionnydd who wanted to drown a village,
I guess it's the same thing again about trying. Like, it's the whole issue of framing stuff and making it. I don't know. Well, in my opinion, right. But I dig that whole a lot, saying that my opinion's right. But the whole thing of like how easy it would be to celebrate Patagonia as this Welsh adventure, this great success, and not looking at it from sorry, I forgot the word now. From a colonial standpoint, like I think it's so hard to like, I don't know. Again, it's the issue with the curriculum, in my opinion. It is so layered and so complicated that we should think about, when we think about schools, we need to think about what do we want the next generation to learn. Are we producing the next workers to learn maths or whatever, or do we want the people? I don't know. It's that whole idea. It's not just learning. Like, the curriculum should be intersectional and should focus on bettering, like, knowing yourself better, like working on your identity. I think about how you can be a part of the community, learning about democracy. There's so many things that we don't touch on in schools right now, like what, I don't know. I just want to build a school with like radicalism and, I don't know, Pablo Freire's book. But do you know what I mean? It's this idea of what could schools be in an independent Wales, and that idea really excites me. Because there's so much possibilities, because you can learn, you can teach so much and give opportunities for young people to think about new things, about philosophy and stuff, because we don't talk about that in schools. Like, I didn't feel like my education was that exciting. We have the Welsh back. I know that's not the most popular thing right now. I quite enjoyed it, but do you know what I mean? It's the idea of what could we do and what tools we can give the next generation in an independent Wales.
I think one of the things that like is another issue with kind of like schools in general when it considers like women's liberation and stuff is we have like a curriculum and the way we teach is entrenched with kind of gender roles. Like just think of like PE, I guess, like a fucking girls do rounders, boys do cricket, essentially, and it's kind of like, why? It's just, why though? And it's just, it's silly things like that where it doesn't need to be kind of gendered like that for any reason. And it's like that gender role, our curriculum needs like a ground up changing, because it we're not understanding that like how people want to learn and stuff, and a lot of people, especially our like children who go through mental health or learning difficulties or anything, our system is just incapable right now. Like it doesn't provide the care we need. The schools are way too big right now. Like just thinking like back when we were in school, some of those schools are gone. You know, they've been coalesced into one super school, and that's terrifying. I have anxiety, and I can barely exist in a room with one other person. I can't imagine like 40 people per class or something crazy like that. It's just, it's horrifying, and it's just not educating people in the most successful way, because by stacking people into rooms of like where everyone's made to look the same, dress the same, we are limiting self-expression. We are training people, we're essentially training the next generation to assimilate rather than be themselves, you know, like force them to conform to our systemically racist and bigoted society, and see how you can navigate that, because those biases do trickle down. Like we've all probably felt it when our teachers have like, you know, like, unintentionally like gone to the male student with a certain question, or like they've gone to the brown student with a certain question or something like that. There's little things, those microaggressions, which like especially in school is so difficult to comprehend, because like I did not have the language to understand it. I know lots of others, and you're already in a position of where like the teacher is the god, essentially, you know, like you say something and they could severely limit your learning and future learning and understanding, you know, like if, and that's the thing, you as a kid, there is, you are you are malleable, but it also leaves you powerless in a lot of regards. And it's one of the biggest things that allows things like kids suffering today from bullying and stuff like that, is because there's not a understanding that like that support, you know, like there's a very top down structure, and unless you're incredibly lucky of like getting a good teacher, or something like that, or someone who specifically understands you, it could, your entire school life can be hit or miss, and from that you could end up struggling in later in life, because you haven't been able, there's, for example, like if you did struggle, like one of the things that gets like is ADHD, for example, and autism, is one of the biggest things that is underdiagnosed in women, because of it presents differently due to how people are meant to mask, how women are meant to mask around like holistics in society. And it's one of the things that's never really like, if you don't get diagnosed in school or noticed in school about it, it is incredibly hard to get a diagnosis when you're an adult, because they essentially tell you, well, you're an adult now and you haven't died, so, and you're, you know, you graduated school, so I guess you're fine. You know, you don't need a diagnosis that could like, you know, help you with getting specific assets of care, or maybe medication if that's something you need, you know, like, or like an access, because it's so much of our things are decided, so much of what we can do as an adult when navigating like being who you are, whether you're like trans or you want to be an artist or a doctor or anything, is very decided in school, when essentially like unless you have unless you have the ambition at the get-go, it can be very difficult to achieve later in life. Like, for example, like med school, for example, is extremely hard to get into. We only have I think there's only one med school in Wales, which is Cardiff, and it's like, what if you wanted to become a doctor later in life? Like it's like, where do you really go for that? And like, or like, there's elitism. Even though our university is free, there is elitism in the way we are accepted into those unis and stuff like that. There's also the like issues of like, some schools don't offer the subjects you need, or some schools will like treat you completely wrong. Like, there is so much decided from something so tumultuous as being a teenager. It's horrifying. Well, yeah.
Because
And
from working I've been teaching for like 6-7 years now. I'm in further education, and I'm across the border as well. I teach in England, but like this is completely true. Everything, yeah, it is so true. Even that level, there's a belief. I get it quite a lot of people saying, "Oh, well, they must come on the course because they want to do that thing you're teaching them," rather than. But it's still, even then, it's so difficult to be like, a lot of my students don't know what they want to do. They don't really have, and they don't have the ability, especially in like rural areas, like where I teach, to understand like, well, you can go into the fields that you want to do if you are. Nothing should stop you from doing it. But then, yeah, there's consistent barriers put up in place by people above them. It's barriers put in place by sort of, because I teach in film. A lot of film stuff has moved to these sort of centralized areas and stuff, and it's very hard for someone who lives in Oswald Street to be like, well, I kind of want to become a filmmaker, because it's like, well, how I don't know how to do that. And it's very hard for them to feel like they can do certain things and stuff like that. And you said then about like being able to get diagnosis for things like ADHD and stuff like that. As a student from a few years back, that they struggled to get a diagnosis. I don't even know if they even managed to get one in the end. And until they had that diagnosis, it was very much a case of, well, you can't put extra provision in place for an exam, despite knowing that that person is being set up to fail there. They won't, without that support and without the sort of, even just the things like extra time and a couple of breaks and stuff would get them through an exam, no problem. It helped them a lot. But because there was not a piece of paper which said it, and they couldn't get the piece of paper, it was sort of, yeah, you just got to go in the meat grinder with everyone else and just sit in the big hall and write as hard as you can for 2 hours. And oh, well, you didn't pass. That's that done for you now. And I think a lot of people then feel trapped then, because they feel like, yeah, if they can't get that support to go on to those next stages and stuff like that, they feel trapped, and it causes it's a great source of frustration for myself, and many people I know who are in the education system. And sometimes it feels like, as you said, feels like sometimes we do have to go down that thing of sort of conveyor the kids in, teach them for 2 hours and then leave again, because again, the structures are not in place to support students. They're not in place to support
demoralizing.
Yeah. It's like the meat grinder, really. They put people in a class, tell them the information. Is like, I think Mara posted there, like I think we said about using critical thinking and stuff for history, and that doesn't seem that can't happen sometimes in a lot of education environments, because it's like, right, you've got to teach them all the facts about the Industrial Revolution, 3, 2, 1, go. There's an exam in 6 months, and it's like, okay, well, where do we start actually understanding that?
It's and things with like history as well. It's like understanding like how history is written is something that's not taught very well unless you take it maybe at GCSE level, and that's about it. And like, until then, if you don't take history at GCSE, you might just like grow up assuming that what history you've been told is the history, and not ever learn to question it. And that's horrifying, because like, you should learn to question things like that. And and especially when you get taught as a kid, it becomes such a foundation to your understanding and worldview. It's harder to unlearn as an adult. Like you can ask kids and they'll be like, oh, what countries participated in World War II? And they'll tell you all the ones in Europe, but they won't tell you the ones in the continent of Africa or Asia, like the land change, or like for example, how like World War One, it wasn't necessarily there was a good or a bad guy necessarily, like it's just because war is messy, and there's a very very push to make it clear that the allies were completely good, especially in things like World War II, where it's like they were completely they weren't, they, but the thing is, they made for some reprehensible decisions in the process. There's not, no one's like, it is horrible. Our country, as like the UK or Welsh people, like in the past, have done horrible things, and it's understanding that and moving past that. And so when people say things like take down like slave plaques and stuff like that, and they're not saying like they want to erase our history, it's to not celebrate the terrible bits and understand that we are flawed as a nation and that we have learning to do. We need to move and grow, but in order to do that is we have to understand and critically analyze our past and understand that our past isn't pure in any way. And like that's why our education system, because the thing is, like, a lot of us who are, a lot of the people who are defending this kind of, or like are being fed talking points saying like they're erasing history, when like history is they're just not being taught all of it during school and stuff. Like we are like vastly undereducating people, and at the same time giving them too information, and it's honestly incredible how we've done it. It's truly, I guess if we could over that, there's one of the best in the world for putting children through like mindless exams, but also learning nothing at the end of it.
Cool. Does anyone have anything else they want to add to that? Cool. So we've got 15 minutes left, so it's probably likely that this will be like the last sort of springboard off discussion. So considering the issues faced by women globally, especially in the less developed parts of the world, how important is it that we maintain sort of international feminism without distracting from women's issues here in the UK and in Wales?
I think firstly it's about seeing that you can't sort of, that all these things are connected, right? So you can't just work for gender equality in one country and not see how the situation of women or any marginalised group in Wales or the UK is connected to the situation of people in other countries as well. And certain chains of exploitation are global. So I think it has to be central to what we do. And I think actually as well, there are so many opportunities to use that to build movements too. And I think some of the really inspiring things we've seen in recent years in like battle for reproductive rights in different parts of the world, that's been, people being inspired by each other. So like Argentina, I think last month, after years of a really powerful like street movement, they've won the campaign to decriminalize abortion in Argentina, and that has been like an incredibly tough long battle for them. And I read a really nice piece where one of the women who was involved had said that when they felt like their campaign was going nowhere, they saw that women in Ireland had won the Repeal the Eighth campaign, and that sort of inspired them. And I think so you can't you can't ignore it, because there are so many potential avenues there for solidarity and learning from each other. And you have to do it too, because the global reactionary right is very much connected. It is networked. Uses issues like reproductive autonomy, like trans rights, as sort of the vanguard of rolling back protections and rights for everyone. So I think unless you sort of see these connections, then your feminism or your socialism is going to be very limited.
I think, yeah, that's like, yeah, I think like going off that is kind of, it's very much like we have this there's this kind of like understanding, I guess, like this expectation that like we're doing better than other countries, like in general. And I'd always like to say that's not really the case, you know, like especially because like the understanding of gender as well is a very much colonial export. Like the gender binary, the fact that we have like men, women is a very much a product of Turf Island, and Turf Island being the UK. That's a very in joke for trans people at the moment, because God, transphobia sucks in this goddamn hellhole. But yeah, so is our main export is like whitewashing history and exporting capitalism and this like, and that's the worry that we have when we get involved in things like that. It's very much of like, are we getting involved with the best intentions, or are we getting involved in order to spread our ideals and what we tend to believe? And it's very much like, for example, like you know, like one of the things is like, oh, we're always kind of like, oh yeah, we need to stop human trafficking and stuff. But like a lot of people who do get human trafficked do it in the sense of like they're paying off people because they want a better life. You know, they're not being kidnapped in their countries or something, and they're paying these people to smuggle them in, and then they're being held hostage by these people. And what will happen, you'll see, is like, yes, human trafficking ring, people freed and arrested, and it's like, yeah, it's that's right. They've arrested the people they freed because they're probably going to deport them, and it's kind of that kind of a thing of where it's like, it shouldn't matter where people come from in that kind of sense of like, you know, the people we have here are like, you can't say that you're freeing someone when you're trying to deport them to a place where, and if they've come here, that should be a testament to where we live. They want to make a better life for themselves. And it's unfortunate that we need to realize that like we are imperfect, that we don't uplift all women in this country. We don't. And it's a lot of people who are extremely marginal, like trans women or trans POC women, and like the misogyny in this country is extreme. It's like the way we treat like black female politicians, for example, is markedly different to say like a white man. You know, it's a very specific subset, and it's not just, there's no sense of like that solidarity like sometimes, because like it's just like it's horrible. Like a Diane Abbott gets shit all the time, and it's never because it's like just because she's a woman, or just because it's because she's a black woman she gets shit. She gets shit from white women in her own party and other people. Like, just it's just, we don't really have a leg to stand on when we treat women so honestly pretty garbage. And the only way that I'd say is like, if we want to like, you know, be involved, is set an example and show that we can be better and do better. Make Wales a place where like people want to come to and understand like, yeah, women are free and not treated with oppression. And it's, you can't free like, if you want to like feel bad, like help other countries, if you can't help yourself, it's not much to do, really, isn't there? You know, like, you need to be able to help yourself before you can help others. And one of the things is kind of just struggling with like things like one of the big things is like with COVID, weirdly enough, like with the vaccine and how we're handling the situation. It's a shame because we are putting marginalized people at risk. And like, for example, the vaccine not being tested, like pregnant women, for example, or pregnant people who they can't have the vaccine because there's worry there's not been enough testing and stuff. And it's things like that. Like, do you think that like the people who are doing these COVID rules have those people in mind? That's what I mean. Like, do they have the people who are like the majority of women who are working in care, the care sector, on their mind? They don't, because that's not their lived experience. They are not living, breathing that experience, unless like they get people who are actively involved and ask, like, you can't. Then that's the understanding of like intersectionality. Essentially, it's that lens of understanding that how factors compound, and we are just extremely diverse people, and it's not very much of like domestic and international issues. It's like, as Mabli said, like everything is interconnected, and like, because some of us have family abroad, or or some of us may like, and the fact that we've left the EU and stuff like that, where Wales lose a large majority of its funding that helped projects for marginalized people, and we don't know what we're going to do with that at the moment. We are standing to lose a lot of the arts groups and stuff. You'll see may well disappear over the coming years, and it's partially because we didn't really get a say in it as Wales. Like we didn't have that. We were misinformed. Our democracy is not a healthy democracy because we are told lies and misinformation, and it's hard to empower ourselves, let alone empower anyone across the globe, when we are being spoon-fed misinformation. And when the people who are trying to dictate laws and things in this country are not people who are on the ground and struggling day to day.
Like, just to carry on from your point about like the pandemic and how it's affected things differently, I think it's highlighted how that sometimes the system doesn't work and how easily it could have been fixed. Because I was looking at how abortions have changed since lockdowns happened. Before lockdown in Wales, you'd have to go to the doctor. You'd have to physically go to the doctor, and then you'd have to go again to get a second opinion from another doctor, and then you'd have to go again to get the pill, and go back home and take the pill 24 hours later. Now they've found out miraculously that you can have phone calls from your house and you don't have to leave. So like me, who lives in the middle of fucking nowhere on Anglesey, I'd have to catch a bus that goes once every a few hours to a GP that's not really that close, to see two doctors on two separate occasions and then go back again. It's not anyway. So my point is the idea it's been solved now by the idea it's more inclusive, because you can just phone the doctor, but now you can either phone a nurse, a midwife, or a doctor, which makes so much sense, and you don't have to get a second opinion, and you can take both pills at home. I mean, the idea of people have not found that an issue. Do you know what I mean? Like, people have not thought, oh, we need to tackle this is a problem. It's taken a literal pandemic for us to solve one easily fixed thing.
Had this with the gender service in Wales. Originally I was supposed to go to Cardiff. Like my first appointment last month, and they said, oh yeah, we'll do a little chat on the internet, and it's like, well, why can't we do that now?
Anyway,
you know what I mean? And it's taken as you said, it's taken it to affect other people, so we get the things that we're supposed to have.
Anyway, it should be a right that we should have. Generally, we shouldn't have waited. We have to wait. Oh yeah.
What it's like in the disabled community, they talk about it's one rule for abled, and once it starts to affect able-bodied people, then is what things change. You know how like remote working is like suddenly a huge boom, and like people who struggle with mental health or struggle with physical ailments, or have children or anything like that, suddenly like they've been asking for years for things to be remote. It's suddenly available. What do you know?
Everyone can work in their second home now as well. How ideal!
It's just
It's worth
like,
It's worth just saying on the abortion arrangements that Welsh Government are consulting at the moment about keeping
not
those.
Okay.
They're consulting at the moment about keeping those arrangements in place. So would definitely encourage people to respond to that. I think it's by the end of the month, just to support continuing with this current system, because it's so clearly better. And I think that's actually, like, abortion, I think, is a really good example of something Shash was saying about, sometimes this tendency of like UK exceptionalism to think that we're better than we are when it comes to gender equality, because the truth is, like, reproductive health access in general and abortion in this country is like atrocious. It's not fully decriminalised. We have a really old-fashioned law from 1967 that's never been updated, and I think, unfortunately as well, I think over the coming years we might end up having a fight on our hands with reproductive health legislation and access anyway. And I think some of the rollback we've seen on trans people's access to healthcare is a front for rolling back the access of cis women to that reproductive healthcare too. So I think it's really important for people to be like very vocal in opposing that.
Thin end of the wedge, as I keep saying on Twitter. Thin end of the wedge is trans people are being used in many instances to get to roll back on things that a lot of those transphobes don't want to have roll back, but they will gladly roll back this little bit. But then how long before those people who are paying the money, who are funding all this stuff, who are creating this connection of essentially bigotry, how long before they start pointing the finger at them? And as the saying goes, there won't be anyone to fight their battle, because we'll all be stuck on, we want to have we'll lose all our rights, and then it'll come for them. And it's the thing is, I think we've got to make sure that when we look at abroad, we got to recognize that we have significant issues in this country. And as Sash said, we've got to look and see where our faults are and be able to fix them, as well as being able to help people around the world. Because my big thing of Indie Wales is we should be a global society. I really worry that as a potential situation where Wales could become an isolated, insular nation, and I would hope that wouldn't be the case, and we can be a nation that can recognise our own problems, but also be able to be a beacon, as you said, be a beacon for other people to say, well, this is how you can run a positive society that cares for its people.
I think, yeah, it's also like we've got to practice what we preach. It's all good, like, trying to increase gender equality, but it's for taking a very strict stance on working, especially foreign policy, I guess, in the future, as like working with countries which have shown human rights abuses and stuff like that, have shown a very extreme view on being LGBT or reproductive health care or anything like that, and taking a stance not to work with them or in that kind of like trade capacity or whatever. And it's just like people do claim asylum and stuff based on that kind of stuff, and the fact that it's like and we don't grant, like, we make people who seek asylum jump through hoops because they don't believe them, when it's like, what more evidence do you need other than like their word? And it's just it's horrible that these people are doubted, because it's one of those things that's just, it's rough. And like sorry. Just it really bothers me, like that like we always end up like selling arms to Saudi Arabia and stuff like that, and then like at the same time be like criticizing it. And it's like, well, you know what you can do if you're willing to criticize the human rights abuses. You can not give them weapons. It might help.
I'm sorry, I just want to address a little anecdote quickly. I'll be really brief, but it's just adding to what Mabli said about needing to fighting for like reproductive rights and having like contraceptive, you know, that we're open about having them and having to talk about it. And the idea of how institutions in Wales are not built for women. So I'm going to use an extremely Welsh example right now and a really personal anecdote. But in the Eisteddfod, there's this youth bit called Maes B, where young people go for the first time and meet other Welsh kids, and people have sex. That's a thing that happens, surprisingly. But this is not a thing that the Welsh people want, because it's this whole purist. Anyway, that's another. I'm in the middle of writing an essay about it anyway. But the idea of you being a 16-year-old and maybe the condom split or something, and you're in the middle of a field, in the middle of nowhere, because the Eisteddfods are really placed really oddly. But if you're in that position where, fuck, I might be pregnant, the condom split, I forgot to wear a condom or whatever, I forgot my pill. How are you, as a 16-year-old or someone who doesn't drive, stranded in the middle of a field in Wales, find a morning after pill? And it's like questions like this just highlight that you need to think about stuff like this. You need to be intersectional about organising institutions, whether it be an Eisteddfod or in an independent Wales, that you need to think about what people's experience, what people will experience, and think about, well, shit, what is going to happen to that 16-year-old for that week when she's stranded in a field? She's alone. Do you know what I mean? Maybe she can't tell her friends or whatever, but just that it's a simple idea of just having a pharmacy on the Maes, in the Eisteddfod. That's it. That's all you need. Yeah. So sorry, that's my little rant at the end, but it's just the idea of institutions need to movements need to think about how intersectional and how we need to address women's issues when. Yeah. Sorry.
Cool. So does anybody have any sort of closing statements they want to make before we wrap things up? No, Llinos has had a rant, so.
Yeah, I guess I think like we didn't really get it asked, so I think I would just be like, if there's things you feel like you want to help and stuff like that, join like your local mutual aid in this lockdown. There's quite a few popping around. I help run a trans-specific mutual aid, so please donate. I'll hopefully the link can go up. But yeah, and you know, make sure you call out bigotry when you see it, and like if you see instances of misogyny and racism, transphobia, call it out, because a lot of the time, if you don't, you're those people who are like people like us, of views you'll be missing out on, and we learn to recognize those dog whistles too, like things like sex-based rights or whatever, or like if someone casually name drops J.K. Rowling in a conversation, or says things, or family values or something like that, little things like that. For us, we all probably recognize those little like dog whistles, and it's an intent to make marginalized people uncomfortable. But if you learn to recognize those, you can immediately shut that down and advocate from businesses or institutions that you know are trans friendly, because like for us trans people right now, one of the biggest things we struggle with is there's a genuine fear, and like it's palpable worry of, will we get hate crimed if we try and access a simple thing as like going to the store, you know, like that. It's genuinely frightening for us right now, and I can't say it enough. Our rights are under threat. We have transphobes in power. Sack Helen Mary Jones, essentially, like tell her to fuck off, please. Yeah.
Yep. Couldn't say any better.
Yeah, I think there's so much to add to that, really. just to say thanks to Valleys Underground really for organising the conversation. I think is really interesting, and I think I don't know, I suppose for me, like the message that comes across really clearly from like everything everyone's been saying, and I've seen like some of the comments as well, is that you know, whatever movement you're talking about, whether that's you know, the feminist movement, socialist movement, the independence movement, like you can't do it unless you include the experiences of everyone, unless it is like genuinely intersectional and genuinely addresses like everyone's needs. And yeah, you're just going to fail otherwise. And it's really important that we sort of build those kind of movements together. And I'm glad that that work is starting to happen in Wales.
I just want to add that everyone again. So many good points. I'm just going to irritate. No, can't say that. Irritate. No, do you know what I mean? But also, I want to just point out, I was in a group chat with some friends on a women's chat talking about lefty movements that we're a part of, and we were all talking about our experiences. And basically, I should say, sexual assault and just general misogyny is such a problem right now. And basically, if you see your friends, just tweet, I don't know, it's just, you can pick up the way that male friends are speaking about women, because there's a lot you can, I'm getting emotional now, but there's just small things that you can read. You don't have to look hard on Welsh indie lefty Twitter to find out, or to work out, to put two and two together about who's not supporting women and making an indie Wales a safe space. Anyway, that's my bit. Diolch.
Cool. So I want to thank everybody for turning up to talk today. It's been a really great chat. Like, we didn't even have to ask you half the questions because you were so great. You just sort of answered them before we even asked them. So it's been brilliant. We're really glad we could provide sort of a platform for you guys to just have like a female-fronted discussion, you know, where we sort of take a backseat and just give you a platform to just talk, because we believe that these movements should be led by women, that women should be leading the charge on women's issues, trans people should be leading the charge on trans issues. I think I speak for Valleys Underground when I say our official position is also sack Helen Marie Jones. And I just want to like thank everybody who turned up to watch. It's been a really great discussion. I'm sure everybody sort of agrees. And if you do want to get involved, have a look at the Twitter, have a look at the Facebook, have a look at our website. Check out all these guys on Twitter. They're all great. They love a good shitpost. You know, it is brilliant. And yeah, thank you all for coming so much. And I think we are done unless anyone has anything to add.
No, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Diolch yn fawr pawb.
Diolch.